Welcome to the special series of Coffee and Chai Chats on Hidden Hunger, hosted by the Micronutrient Forum. In today's chat, addressing the high global levels of micronutrient deficiencies among women worldwide, we have Dr. Purnima Menon as our special guest. Dr. Menon is a Senior Director of Food and Nutrition Policy at the International Food Policy Research Institute and is based in New Delhi, India. And in a global role, she's also a Senior Research Fellow in IFPRI's Poverty, Health, and Nutrition Division. In her work in India, she has directed POSHAN, which stands for Partnerships and Opportunities to Strengthen and Harmonize Actions for Nutrition in India, for over a decade, and an initiative to support more use of evidence for nutrition in India. She has led teams who conduct implementation research on scaling up maternal and child nutrition interventions in India, Bangladesh, Ethiopia, Haiti, Vietnam, and Nepal, and invests deeply in research translation in her engagement with policy communities. Welcome, Dr. Menon. So today's chat is being hosted by myself. My name is Martin Mwangi, and I'm the program lead of the Healthy Mothers and Healthy Babies Consortium at the Micronutrient Forum. And I would encourage you to visit our website to know more about the work of the Healthy Mothers, Healthy Babies Consortium. So please feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat and mention your name and the name of your organization and the country and your country. And please also note that this session will be recorded. All participants will be muted during the presentation, and during the question and answer session, please type your question in the chat or raise your hand to ask questions. When you are asked to speak, please unmute yourself and switch on your video. Then kindly mute yourself when you're finished speaking. I will now invite Dr. Menon to proceed with her opening presentation, after which we will follow up with a question and answer session. Dr. Menon, over to you. You're muted.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Martin, for the wonderful introduction to this session. And thank you to the Micronutrient Forum for hosting and having me today to be on this coffee and chai chat. It's a little late for both coffee and chai for me in India, but I'm glad to be here. It's the very first time that I'm actually presenting somebody else's paper to help us in these, opening and sort of setting the stage for our discussion today. So, firstly, I want to acknowledge the incredible work that was done by the authors of the paper published in Lancet Global Health on micronutrient deficiency, and really acknowledge especially the leadership of the team, the Global Micronutrient Deficiencies Research Group that pulled that paper and all of the data and all of that together. And then the paper writers, particularly Gretchen Stevens, Ty Bio, and other colleagues from GAIN and FAO who were part of the paper. So it's not my paper, just a great opportunity to present work that has been done by them. What I liked about the work that they set out to do, which was very ambitious, was this sort of trying to take the world of measurement of micronutrient deficiencies beyond where it had been before, which was really predominantly based on the use of anemia as a marker of micronutrient deficiencies, and bringing together data on other micronutrient deficiencies as well. Particularly zinc, iron, vitamin A, and where available, a few other micronutrients. And so, I think there's some very innovative and sort of really a lot of hard work that has gone into the methods, because they had to think through, consolidate these different data sets, bring together insights on, how to apply cutoffs, using some of the newer work from the Brinda group, etc. So it's quite a mammoth effort to bring this together. And so it's a really a great privilege to be able to, to present their findings here, and then offer some of my own reflections as we lead into the chat session. So let me first, say that I think one of the most important findings is the magnitude of the micronutrient deficiencies that the authors identified in their work. I mean, studying just 3 micronutrients, they found that 1 in 2 preschool age children are affected by at least one of those 3 micronutrient deficiencies, and that 2 in 3 women of reproductive age were affected by at least one of those the 3 deficiencies that were studied among non-pregnant women of reproductive age, so zinc, iron, and folate. So I want also the audience and us to kind of keep in mind that what we have here is very high rates of, the prevalence of deficiencies for the very few nutrients for which the data is available to be able to ascertain these deficiencies. Imagine what this might look like if we had more data on more micronutrient deficiencies. Can we have the next slide, please? So these are broadly what those numbers look like. So, the prevalence of deficiency in at least one of those 3 micronutrients is 56% for preschool age children, and nearly 70% for, for the 3 micronutrients that were examined for women. So really large numbers in terms of the global prevalence. And, global is really global here. It's not just in low and middle income countries. The data sets have brought together insights for high income countries as well, really reflecting that micronutrient deficiencies are a challenge for populations worldwide. Next slide, please. So again, I think any which way that the data has been presented, we see sort of very high levels in terms of the prevalence of deficiencies for different types of micronutrient deficiencies, but really, for different geographic areas, not different types of micronutrient deficiencies. But what you see here is, how astoundingly high the prevalence of any deficiency is for women in particular, almost regardless of where they live. So even if women, and the data were coming from high income countries, you're seeing nearly 50% of women and 50% of children face, the prevalence of face deficiencies in one or more of these core micronutrients that were examined for each of those groups. So very high regardless of geography. What does that mean? Next slide for, what and how some of these numbers translate. Now, of course, the deficiencies are higher in, in the non-high income countries part of the world. So in South Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa, 9 in 10 women have at least one of those 3 micronutrient deficiencies. But both in the US and in the UK, it's 1 in 2 and 1 in 3, again, high income countries, and then 1 in 5 who have iron deficiency for women in the UK and the US. Again, really reminding us that micronutrient deficiencies are quite a challenge even in high income countries. Next slide. Yeah, just another sort of blowing that up a little bit or going a little bit deeper in to see what do these things look like in countries where there were data on more than those 3 micronutrient deficiencies. And I think here again what you see is that in those specific countries where there were data available on more of those micronutrient deficiencies, you see again, sort of high levels of deficiencies of multiple types of micronutrients. Again, just really re-emphasizing for us the challenges, but also how they're playing out country by country. I think what's interesting about this part of the analysis is it really demonstrates the value for individual countries of having data on specific micronutrient deficiencies. We tend to use data from things like the DHS and other type surveys, which have some data on some types of micronutrient deficiencies. But at the end of the day, there really is no substitute for deeper surveys and data collection efforts in individual countries, and perhaps at some point later, even in subnational entities, to really understand what local challenges look like. One could hardly label some of these, big countries such as India as local, but still, having that data at the national, and then I know in India that data set has subnational data as well, is just really very valuable to understand the whole picture. Next slide, please. Good. Now, I think it's useful, as we move towards closing out the brief introductory presentation, to reflect on, why do we care about micronutrient deficiencies through the life cycle? And I think what we know is just an accumulation of evidence that micronutrient deficiencies, poor micronutrient status, really is associated with a full range of functional outcomes of many different types. And so, this is really why we worry about the micronutrient status of the human body, really in, around the world at different stages of the life cycle. And of course, when you reflect back on the Lancet Global Health paper, there's data in that paper on, just a couple of slices of the life stages and a few micronutrients, and a few countries, a few parts of the world, really, if you're to think about it in detail. But what's important for us to recognize is that micronutrients play a critical role in supporting human function. Anyone who studied nutrition, physiology and biochemistry and the interplay of all of that knows. I mean, I know that this aspect of nutrition is what sort of sucked me into the field many years ago. The interplay of, what nutrient status does in our body with functions of the human body. So it's really important that we pay attention to this and enhance our understanding, have the data come together on it. Last slide, please, and then we'll open up for discussion. I think whenever we think about challenges and sort of laying out a problem landscape, it's important to remind ourselves that, we also need to think with equal vigor about the solution landscape. What do we have in our hands as tools to help us understand how to improve the micronutrient status of populations? And of course, a big component of what improves the micronutrient status of the human body is what we consume or put into the human body as micronutrients. And then, the other part of preserving nutrient status is to protect people from being ill. And what this means is, because illnesses lead to nutrient losses, right? And that affects micronutrient status, among other things. But what this means is that we need to think about our solutions with sort of the fullness of, both what the kinds of platforms that can deliver micronutrients into the human body, both micronutrients as they are carried in whole foods, and our diets, and micronutrients as they may be carried in, either through the fortification of staple foods or through micronutrient supplements, and also to think about these from an equity lens. So I think one of the ways, and there are many ways to think about the solution landscape and systems that deliver solutions, but this idea that we should think about not just health systems, but also, food systems and social protection programs, to really think with an equity lens across the full spectrum of solutions that we do have available in the world of micronutrients, is really important for us. I think in every setting that we work in, we really need to be thinking about, the full range of solutions and who they come together for, and how we really we can try to bring them together. So with those, closing words, in a sense, I also want to remind ourselves that, what's exciting about this paper is, the fact that the team has brought together all of this information. But I think we also have to pay attention to the fact that what's there in the paper is only what's available and what we've measured. And of course, there's a long legacy in the world of nutrition of paying attention to certain nutrients, right? Vitamin A and iron and folic acid and zinc. But there's so much that isn't measured when we really think about, the full range of micronutrients, sort of essential micronutrients that are needed for human function. And so there are also lots of data gaps in what we don't know about micronutrient status. And one of the big things that we should eventually guard against is how we shouldn't fall prey to our own sometimes tendencies to be reductionist about how we think about micronutrients. We can't afford, in a sense, to think only about single micronutrients. I think we have to really step back from this, appreciate the interplay between micronutrients, appreciate that what we want is sort of balance in the human body, balance in eventually in the data that's collected, and what we end up wanting to keep our eyes on. So let me close with that, and hope I think I may have taken a little more time than intended, but let me bring us back to Martin and open, I guess, our conversation up. Thank you again for the opportunity to speak about this paper today.
Thank you so much, Dr. Menon. I think, well, that's the intention of a chai chat. It's a bit relaxed. We can take 1 extra minute, but of course, I'm sure the audience is burning to ask some questions. So I encourage everyone to post their questions on the chat. And maybe just to start us off, you stated, well, nearly 50% of women and 50% of children face micronutrient deficiencies. 9 out of 10 women in South Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa have at least one deficiency. These statistics essentially indicate that almost all women are micronutrient deficient. The question from me would be, where and how do we start to address such a widespread and essentially universal problem?
Food first. There is a part of me that wants to, run to the lab tomorrow and get my own blood tested, right, to figure out, what deficiencies am I carrying. But I think, again, for me, I go back to this idea of how do we avoid nutrition reductionism in the solutions that we offer, whether it's solutions that we offer to policymakers or solutions that we offer to individuals. We really, really have to, be able to speak with one voice. And I really like this sort of the last slide that we have here, which is that multiple systems in the ecosystems that we inhabit, our health system, our food system, and our social safety nets, or our economic wherewithal for people who aren't covered by social safety nets, offer us the opportunity to find solutions to reduce micronutrient deficiencies. And so really being able to understand the population basis in the context that we work in, being able to identify, what is the right mix of that solution basket that already exists, whether, in and across food systems, health systems, and safety nets. Where in that solution, how do we sort of deploy and understand how to deliver that solution basket in a local enough context? I think for me, this is the challenge, because it's not going to be a one solution fits all. You're looking at multiple age groups, multiple life stages, multiple access, differential access to different types of platforms, and to the systems that deliver. And we really run the risk, if all we're going to do is to offer, single solutions. We run the risk of remaining behind the curve if we don't sort of really help decision makers come together with a basket of solutions.
Mm-hmm. And I like what you said, no one solution fits all, and we have to come up with a basket of solutions. From your experience and understanding of what works, can you identify key factors that positively influence both maternal and child anemia, for example? And where are we seeing success in women's nutrition?
So I think anemia has been, with the data that we have, and I know lots of people have raised challenges of, some of the measurement issues around anemia and other such things. I think we haven't seen the kind of success that we want to see or that we've seen with other nutritional outcomes. But there are other nutritional outcomes, such as stunting, where there have been several success cases now that have been documented, across at least, two major research groups and collaborators. One, the exemplars in global health team, with whom I have an advisory role, and then ADIF-PRE, our Stories of Change research team and extensive partner network have really studied, what kinds of things contribute to stunting reduction. And I think there are lessons in there for understanding how we bring change on nutrition as a whole. And some of that relates to what we are seeing here in the micronutrient world, right? I mean, first, people have to accept that this is a problem, and they have to acknowledge that within their own context. You need local leaders, local politicians, local, health officials, and local could be national. I don't mean local in a very hyper local district kind of a way. But people have to acknowledge the problem and then set out a vision to tackle that particular problem. And where, for example, one has seen stunting decline, and I think this would be the same if we were, and I know there's a whole body of work beginning on anemia exemplars as well now, to understand, sort of the coming together of science on the solutions together with the systems that deploy those solutions, and staying the course, learning about, how those solutions are playing out, how they're reaching people, are we achieving equity goals? There are some big lessons, I think, from the stunting success cases. And I'm very curious to see what comes out of some of the anemia success cases that are being examined right now. I'm not, part of that outside of India. But I hope that we'll learn some things. And what's going to be interesting to see there is whether similar elements come up in, the scaling up of impact on micronutrient deficiencies and, say, reduction of anemia as in the reduction of stunting. I think it's going to be really interesting because there's over 20 stunting success cases now that have been documented at sort of national or subnational scale. Whereas for anemia, I don't think we quite have that yet. So yeah, I hope that's helpful.
And Josiah Oyalo is commending that part about the food basket solution. And he's asking, how often do we carry out laboratory analysis to validate the bioavailability of these nutrients in the food matrices? From where you sit, Dr. Menon, would you have a response to that one?
I think, I mean, you need all kinds of capabilities in place when we're doing work around nutrition, right? And actually having that kind of lab capability is really so important in every country, really. So, I'm hoping that where there are national institutes of nutrition or, food science or food science or food technology related laboratories, that they can begin to play these roles as well. Countries don't need to be updating food composition tables with high frequency, but certainly countries do need to have, some sense of, databases of, foods that are available, consumed, and all of these foods have different food matrices, right? What the nutrient levels are there and things like that. So definitely, I think there needs to be a lot more work there in terms of sort of, and this is part of institutional capacity building for nutrition that, national governments need to take very seriously.
Yeah. And I just before I open up the floor to also other people to put on their video and ask questions directly to you, I would like to also, I know you're passionate about food systems, and so I would like to ask you a question about that. And talking about the systems and recognizing climate change and how this is impacting food systems and the nutrition status of women. These are the most affected by all these changes in the climate. How do we change the food systems to protect especially women? if you can react to that, and then we can ask the audience to switch on their videos, and I can see a
I
lot of
wish
questions
I had
coming
an
up in the
answer.
chat.
I wish I had an answer to that question, right? And I think on the questions that you've asked, we have more questions than we have answers right now. I think we're beginning to see what happens when we have big shocks that are due to climate change, like the floods in Pakistan, like the failing of crops in different parts of Africa, like what happens when you have droughts, etc. I think we're beginning to understand or to see that. Some of this has even happened with COVID, or you're beginning to understand what happens when you have economic shocks, which are likely caused by either COVID or climate or conflict. They change food prices. Food prices will change what people have the ability to access. So I feel like we have in this space more questions than answers, and certainly more questions than answers about solutions. Whether it's research that has been done using modeling techniques, whether it's research that's been done using on ground data collection, through this, I think the last 2 or 3 years have been a range of different types of shocks that have hit humanity. And all the data that people have brought together in the context of those shocks, is helping us to understand that these shocks matter, and that they play out in different ways in different contexts. What's also interesting is that in some countries, they're also showing that even where sometimes you have had shocks, that things such as social protection programs can play a big role in buffering people from shocks. And those social protection programs can take many different forms. They can take the form of cash transfers, of food transfers, etc. But what we can do as researchers, as people who want to help others see the world and in terms of understanding these impacts, is to continue to track these, to continue to do the modeling, to continue to vet the modeling against some of the on-ground data, and sort of create coherence even across different types of data and research that have come together on what happens in these conflicts. And then keep our eyes on what are the solutions that are coming back to in a sense buffer or protect people. And we do keep coming back to things such as social protection and livelihood support and these types of programs, but all of them cost money. They cost the government exchequers money. They, donors need to be able to put in money if the government doesn't have it. And it just requires constant vigilance, constant data gathering, constant advocacy, and sort of strong linkages, I think, between researchers, advocates, civil society, the media, to just always keep the issue in the light. This is something that we can all do, always keep the issue in light.
I like that. And I would like to encourage our audience to also now put on their videos and shoot questions directly to you. You're on the spot today, unfortunately, but I know that some of us also have answers and we could also help answer. And as they do that, I would like to spotlight a question by Zipporah Bukania from Kemri, Kenya, who is saying, the good thing is we now have the knowledge of the challenges and the widespread micronutrient deficiencies. Given the known expertise, as you say, we need local solutions and commitment mainly by policymakers. How do we advocate to send this message of the need for commitments and resource allocation to these deficiencies? As you think about that answer, I would like again to remind our audience to put on their videos. If you have a question, feel free to ask Dr. Menon directly or put it in the chat and I will read it out. Over to you, yeah. Dr. Menon.
Zipporah, thank you. That is an amazing, very, very thoughtful question. I keep coming back to, who does the advocacy, who sort of, someone said to me many, many, many years ago, right? In every country, in every context, there has to be somebody who wakes up every morning and says, it's my job to remind people of the urgency and the importance of acting on nutrition. it's my job to help policymakers and anybody else really who's interested in finding solutions to know the best of science, to to help work with them, etc. And the beauty of nutrition now is that we have many people who are very interested in nutrition. And what we need in every country is sort of a strong cadre of nutritionists who can work with these many people to help them understand the problem, to help them identify the right solutions in their context. The nutrition agendas in countries need to be owned locally. They need to be advised locally. We need many more of us in each of these contexts who are able to do all of that, not just do our research and not engage with policy, or to advocate for something, but there has to be a core we in every context that comes together, puts all our forces in one place. It's like somebody does the research, somebody else is involved with supporting programming work, yet another person or a group is very skilled at advocacy. But really sort of coming together in context, bringing all our skills together, bringing commitment together, doing that as locally as you possibly can. In my experience, these are the things that can make a difference in terms of compelling and supporting politicians, policymakers, financiers to act on a problem. It can't be done at distance. It can't be done via, remote control from anywhere. There has to be sort of a steadiness to the people who hold an agenda together in any country. We've seen that. We've seen that with, iodized salt, for example, in India. We've seen that with, stunting reduction in many countries. The coming together is very, very important. That's what we can all do, bring people together.
Right, and I remind people to put up their hand to through the chat to ask a question. There's a nice follow-up question to what you've just said, and it's being asked by Zora Lukmanji, who is saying there has been micronutrient interventions during the past 3 decades. I think this is a question in all our minds. What have been the lessons learned? What were the successes? What were the failures? Any reflections on that?
I'm going to go back to the words I used earlier. I think there was a lot of reductionism in the solutions that we offered earlier. We talked about vitamin A. There was reductionism even in how we framed the problem, right? I mean, if you think back to where the field was 25 years ago, we had, people talking about vitamin A, we had people talking about iron, we had people talking about zinc, we had people talking about other things. And we didn't, as a collective, talk about the nutrition challenge as a whole, or about micronutrient deficiencies as a whole. So I think for me, maybe, and of course we've had tremendous this iodine is also part of this cluster, right? But I think there's a lot of successes that we've seen with, of course, even those focused or potentially, what one might see as reductionist conversations around, a solution targeted to a single micronutrient deficiency, but still effectively scaled up, iodine through the food system, vitamin A through the health system, iron through potentially multiple systems. And I think we kind of I feel like we have to connect the dots around all of those and think about, how do you bring the lessons from that together to, really talk about the problem the way we're framing it now, which is that it's a multiple deficiencies or multiple sort of challenges kind of a problem, and also multiple systems types of solutions.
Yeah, thank you for that. I recognizing Dr. Wanjiko, if you could, if possible, could put your video. As I said, go ahead and ask your question, then followed by Mauli. If you could unmute yourself.
I'm in a bit of a noisy place, but please forgive me. Great presentation, Purnima. And I just come from, I've come from the CG system previously, so I know, the push towards working from a food systems approach. And my question is more a build up to what Zipporah asked. In the case of where maybe advocacy has been done, and you're looking for multi-sectoral action to be able to address, nutrition solutions. And now we are looking more for solutions that can do multi-duty actions, right? Not double duty, but, and this calls for, sort of prioritization, especially in low and middle income countries. And I'm wondering from your experience whether you have tools that, could assist policymakers be able to prioritize what solutions would work best, considering the low, resource allocation or resource available for, our competing resources in that environment.
Yeah, thank you, Vanjiko. Very, very important question again. So I know that there have been some modeling tools to support resource allocation. There was something called Optima Nutrition that had been designed and deployed by the World Bank teams in a few countries. So there are some options out there. I have to say, I'm a huge fan of Paul Farmer, okay? And the reason that Paul Farmer made such a big difference in my life was that he, his work is a great reminder that every human being matters. And his philosophy is like, we shouldn't get so caught up in, cost effectiveness and prioritization and sort of, working with scarce resources is obviously a reality. But is that the aspiration that we should have? I think we should continuously push for more resources for nutrition and for improving people's diets, because nutrition is a human right. Diets and healthy diets are a human right. No human being should go hungry. No human being should go without enough food or enough quality food to eat. So while we try to work with people on things like prioritization, et cetera, in the short term, I think we can never let go of principles of, of equity and of, healthy diets for all as a critical ask of everyone, of society, of politicians, of policymakers. What's on your and my table should be available to most human beings, to all human beings on this earth. If we should work with people on prioritization. There exist tools on that, but I think with equally strong voices, we have to call for nutrition equity and for food equity as a human right. Because that is where we will, we need that to solve the many different types of nutrition challenges that we have. We need that.
Right. And Mauli, your hand was up. I don't know whether your question has been answered. If not, you feel free to go ahead and ask it.
Yeah, thank you, Martin, and it's good to see you. Thank you, Purnima, for the presentation. I have a very practical and pragmatic question. And we all know that one of the strategic intervention to contributing to reducing vitamin and mineral deficiencies is large-scale food fortification. And this is a public-private partnership initiative that we can leverage. We've seen the impact that we have made with salt iodization, universal salt iodization, and how that has contributed to addressing the high burden of iodine deficiency globally with the work of UNICEF and other partners. Now we're talking about other fortification programs using vitamin A in oil or iron and folic acid in wheat flour and zinc. And government has a huge leverage to reach significant proportion of their populations with this intervention, which is a very great food system approach to getting populations, women and children, to have access to essential vitamin and minerals. So my question is, how do we make that more effective? How do we get government to commit to this and make it work and enforcing it? A number of countries have passed mandatory legislation on fortification. How do we make sure that there's compliance and enforce it and make sure that it's reaching vulnerable populations within the communities where we have very high burdens of micronutrient deficiencies? Of course, we need to continue to promote dietary diversification, biofortification and other health intervention, deworming, and all of that that's contributing to that. But we have here is a tool that we can leverage private sector to make sure that we reach significant proportion of the population. How do we make it more effective? I don't know if you have some reaction to that.
Yeah, I think there too, the biggest lessons on fortification of any food commodities come from the iodization world, right? And I think those relate to the kinds of challenges that or the areas that need attention that you've spoken about, political commitment, getting your processes right, getting everyone who's a producer, lined up and able to deliver, having the policy regulations in place, but also the support, the financing, the monitoring. It's not very different from that if you're thinking about, other types of fortification in the context of, it's the kind of needs are very much there. The lessons, from salt iodization is, really about the kinds of people who I think were working in different countries, and across the world to kind of keep monitoring that, continue to sort of keep that as an issue that was on, political sort of radar screens. There were people in many countries who were waking up every single day of their lives and thinking about that one single issue, right? That's what you need, whether it's salt iodization or fortification of something else or dietary diversification. You literally need these people who are waking up every day and saying, okay, what am I doing today to move that needle a little bit further to solve yet another problem that's going to come up about that, whether it's a politician who's changing a guideline or something else that's coming up. I think the steadiness and the support of technical actors who also know how to engage in policy and implementation support is really important. I think we cannot operate solely as technical actors in a world that is as complex and for problems that are as important as the ones that we're working on. It is not enough. But I think there is evidence on fortification. There's plenty of evidence where it's worked, just as there would be on the other solutions that we have, whether it's making social safety nets work for nutrition or to get food supplements or cash to the poorest, etc. There is plenty of evidence on the how-tos, and almost everywhere you will find the role of champions and catalysts and people who kind of are dogged about helping something work.
And I feel like Louis Mar Lang, I hope I am saying the name correctly, might follow up Mauli's question. She says, or he says, nutrition has been long considered as a business of the health sector, while in fact, nutrition efforts need multi-sectoral approach as mentioned in the food system slide. Another challenge is that in some lower middle income countries, health budget allocations spares less for nutrition being on the quick win in nature. We do need to put more effort to advocate policymakers to encourage all sectors for better accountability and more coordinated approach. And she says, it would be great to hear your impression and suggestions to help those solve those challenges. And I think that's what you're speaking to.
I think so.
Yeah. And
I mean,
also
we need nutrition technical people who can work with each of these sectors. I don't think it's enough if we nutrition people sit on the side and say we need multi-sectoral solutions. You need to be someone who can, say, okay, I'm going to help the health sector in my country figure out what it can do on nutrition. I'm going to help agriculture, or maybe, somebody else who works on nutrition will help and work with the ag sector on doing what they need to do. Someone else works with, food and food processing. But I think we have an increasing number of nutrition professionals now around the world, and including in countries where the challenge is as vast as it is in South Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa. And we should be able to work with sectors in each of these different contexts, to help them really figure out what they can do to sort of, make things work.
Would you say that maybe one area nutritionists have not really looked into is communication? How do we communicate more effectively? For example, I mean, it's unacceptable to have 40% or 1/3 of your children under 5, stunted and becomes a liability. The economic cost is huge, but maybe we are not communicating effectively on this, or maybe we are not getting the message across the way it should be sent across. And maybe government is not getting our message. I mean, if the banks go bankrupt, I mean, if they go all out to save them, but here you have 30%, 40% of your population, or some cases, 60% of your women are anemic. And you think you don't need to take action. Maybe there's a challenge with communication or the way, or we are talking to ourselves and we are not really getting the message across. I don't know what's your impression on that.
Yeah, and also I don't want to paint such a doom. I don't think we have a doomsday scenario in that sense, right? I feel like certainly on micronutrient deficiencies, we're not there, but on other forms of malnutrition, there have been improvements over the last 2 decades. Childhood stunting in particular, I think, is one. On scaling solutions, there have certainly been successes, in so many of the micronutrient solutions, huge successes on scaling, especially, supplementation and, certain forms of fortification. We have to lean in on what was learned from those. Are we on a day-to-day basis, are the people who are working on advocacy able to draw down on insights from these successes to work with, politicians and other counterparts? I would say that we've done very well at helping people around the world, politicians, funders, all kinds of people, appreciate the problem of malnutrition. You hear more conversations about malnutrition today as a problem than you did before. You will certainly hear many people, again, politicians, funders, scientists from different places, etc., acknowledge that it's caused multidimensionally and that solutions need to be multi-sectoral. And then after that, once we get into the solution space, maybe we're not able to make things click as effectively over there. But I think on the first part, on problem recognition, knowing that it's something that they should pay attention to, I think between global advocacy, national, advocates and other things, problem recognition is very, very strong. We need to really lean in now on, sort of what have we all collectively learned about solutions, but also what have people in country learned about solutions in context? Because when you think about what we need to solve different parts of malnutrition or to deliver solutions, at the end of the day, the scaling of solutions, the challenges that scaling faces, the challenges that implementation faces, there are some commonalities, but the ways in which these things play out are different by context. And so I think we need a lot more in terms of, digging in to context, drawing down on the best evidence that exists on deploying solutions, but trying to really figure this out in context. And a lot of my work experience has been in India. And it's been fascinating because, with the same national framework, the same ways of financing programs from the federal level in India, you see very different outcomes. You see very different deployment of solutions depending on where you are in the country. And that speaks to the importance of local.
Yeah. I just would like to maybe pose another extra question here, because it seems like we are focusing on the issues of resources, and somebody has mentioned that we have to invest in nutrition, and then somebody else has also mentioned that and from the chart that unfortunately in most lower middle income countries, and then nutrition funding is still donor driven. Programs are still donor driven. What must we do if we have to start seeing the dial as far as micronutrient deficiency is starting to come down in terms of investments in nutrition programming? And maybe you could also mention about research related investments.
Yeah, I think firstly the nutrition agenda must be set as locally as possible, because at the end of the day, it's the citizens of a country, the people who live and work and or choose to live and work in a certain country for long years, that are most committed to solving the problems of that space. So the more that any of us in global organizations can do to really support local agenda setting, local problem recognition, problem identification, resource mobilization, I think the more successful the agenda will be in the long run, right? Because at the end of the day, people in their own countries are the most passionate about wanting to solve those challenges. Everyone else can only lend a helping hand in some way or the other, whether it's supporting research or supporting financing or supporting advocacy, because sometimes advocacy needs support from others as well. It's not enough if just you say that it's a problem locally. Sometimes having that being recognized, being supported, and sort of really flagged from the outside is important. So we all have to work together, global actors, regional actors, local actors. But the financing of nutrition, is a challenge. And I think at the end of the day, governments need to own the agenda, because they work very closely with the people who finance the development agenda. They work to ask donors what they want. They work to, and it's a back and forth. You see how that plays out in many different contexts. But national governments have tremendous power. Local researchers and local actors have tremendous power to be able to work with their national governments to make the right asks happen for their challenges, whether it's for data to understand how your micronutrient challenges look like on the ground, whether it's for data to understand what your solution space looks like, whether it's to try out some new solutions. And thank you, Zora, you're right. It is easier said than done, but I think it requires everybody at different levels to dig in. I mean, it has been very interesting for me to have been part of, working with many different development partners and national actors on nutrition in India over a very long period of time. It took years just to get the right levels of program, of problem recognition. It took years to get, a reasonable, grounded multi-sectoral strategy that is owned by, many different people in the country together. It took many people working together. And that's the sad reality in some ways, that despite the problem being as big as it is, it can take a very long time, but it will take people working together. And I think there are many examples of that around the world.
Thanks. We come into to a close of this Q&A open session, and I want to give one last opportunity to Kevin Wanyonyi to ask his question, and then from there we are going to wrap up. Kevin, if you could put on your video and unmute yourself, and keep your question as short as possible.
Thank you very much for this opportunity. Just try to join very late, but I want to appreciate the discussion. My thinking is that we need really to differentiate between, I feel as a young nutritionist trying to push the agenda of zero hunger and malnutrition, that there are people who are comfortable in this field already. Like we were trying to analyze how many reports that, for example, where we are now, like in the whole sub-county, for example, a whole constituency, you find out that the government has only employed maybe one nutritionist to try and maybe do the nutrition activity. So at the end of the day, you find out that there are other cadres, there are other people who are being involved in the activity that maybe they have not specialized in. So at the end of the day, you find out that there are reports being collected that, those reports to a nutritionist may not make very serious information at the end of the day, because it's just collected because it's end of the month, or maybe someone wants a nutrition report. But now, passionately, these people are very comfortable and they are working within that environment. So those are things that are hindering nutrition activities reaching to the last person on the ground. So my thinking is that those people who are in position, for example, if you are employed by the county government, we need to create need so that we ensure that other colleagues, other young nutritionists are able to get an opportunity also to come on board and try and serve. When you see maybe, for example, it's good to have a multi-purpose approach in terms of malnutrition and maybe hunger. But at the end of the day, we need also to have key roles being played by specific profession to ensure that they understand what they are supposed to do. So that's my contribution, but I'm grateful for the opportunity and a great discussion. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for talking about nutrition capabilities and about, really the roles of everyone in other sectors. You make some very, very important points, and I just want to acknowledge all of them. It is really important that we have enough nutritionists, but nutritionists are not going to solve the nutrition challenges of this world by ourselves. We need, everybody else to be playing their parts, people who work on agriculture, people who work in the health sector, people who work in financing for development in general, politicians, civil society, media, and I think it is possible. It takes patience, it takes perseverance, it takes all of us having a good laugh once in a while about how ridiculous some things are around us, but we have to stay the course. We have to stay the course. The challenges ahead of us are too big for us to not try to really come together, put egos aside, and really help try to connect the dots around the world on these challenges.
Now, thank you so much, Dr. Menon. And Anissa, I do see your hand. Unfortunately, I will have to request you to put your question in the chat, and we can answer you privately or by email, because we do try to keep the expert chats or the coffee and chai chats to really within time, so that because a lot of people tune in with specific from different time zones with specific time slots. You are such a resourceful person from where you sit at IFPRI, but also in the field of nutrition. And I think we need more of you. I think I can't put it better than Kevin has just put it. We need gatekeepers of nutrition. We need more training. We need more personnel, especially in lower middle income countries, posted to the lowest levels of nutrition programming, so that, as he put it, the issues on the ground can be elevated to the local reports that go on to build the global report, so that even as we get the global nutrition report, they are built based on data coming from the ground. I'm not saying it doesn't come from the ground, but we do recognize that we have gaps that need to be filled. He also mentioned that we need a lot of nutrition champions. Now, there are a lot of points that came out of this expert chat, but if I could just mention one or two. You mentioned that nutrition, diet, and food is a human right. I think that is really, I can't even expound it further than that. I think this is something that we have to bring back to the attention of those who have to listen to. And where we are at it, we have to put across the second point that you made that I captured my attention, that we should never let go of the principles of equity, and that healthy diets are a must for all. I think I couldn't put it better than you did on that one. There were also points about we need to prioritize and leverage the private sector. A lot of times in nutrition, we tend to want to go it alone, but we have to carry the private sector along. Food fortification has been done by very many other players. Micronutrient deficiencies have just been spotlighted now better than anyone could. We need all hands on deck to help bring the dial back down, and we cannot leave anyone behind. We need to communicate effectively, and nutrition is still a donor-driven activity in most low middle-income countries. Governments need to start prioritizing funding nutrition interventions, increase demand for fortified foods, for example, and engage in multi-sectoral approaches and investments in nutrition. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to bring this chat to an almost close, but before we end, would like to mention that when it comes to advocacy for nutrition, there are a lot of tools available, for example, from the Healthy Mothers, Healthy Babies website, and I encourage you to visit the website, and you will find a lot of tools that you could download free of charge, free of copyright, to be able to use for advocacy. I would also want to highlight that in the upcoming International Congress of Nutrition in Japan, there will be a session organized by the Healthy Mothers, Healthy Babies Micronutrients Across a Woman's Life course. This will be on the 7th of December, and it will be possible to if you are there, if you are able to access to engage further on this topic. We have another upcoming coffee and chai chat on the 12th of January. I would also ask you to be on the lookout for that one, and then hopefully you can be able to participate in that one, and we can further this we can take this conversation a little bit further. Now, for that one, we will be advertising it in the coming days on our Twitter pages, the Micronutrient Forum Twitter pages. So feel free to follow us on those, and you will find the information hopefully on the chat. I can see it's already been posted on the chat on LinkedIn, Twitter, and you will be able to engage with us on the same. Now, we are talking about especially women, and we cannot end without spotlighting women's voices. So we we went out and talked to women in, for example, in various parts of the world, but for this specific one was a woman in India from Aurangabad. And maybe I should ask Dr. Menon to just, spotlight this one. Do you have any anecdote about Aurangabad that you could use to launch this video? And then we can...
Yeah, I do indeed. While you're bringing up the video, I can just say, so, gosh, I don't even remember now, but maybe back in 2006 or 7, the first sort of a kickoff of a nutrition mission in the state of Maharashtra in India, which was almost a precursor for, the idea of a nutrition mission, which happened nationally several years later. It actually started in the district of Aurangabad in Maharashtra. So I was quite thrilled to share that little anecdote when the Micronutrient Forum team told me that this video is from a health worker in Aurangabad. So that's the little anecdote. And I'll see if I can share a link on that. But yeah, and thank you so much for having me. I think we can do no better than to end with the words of, hearing from health workers. Thanks.
Thank you, everyone, and enjoy the video. It's just 4 minutes, so don't sign out before it's over. And looking forward to seeing you in the next coffee and chai chat. Could you play the video? Thank you.
हे बंजारा लोकांचं गाव आहे. या तांड्यावर आहे. अशी काही सुविधा नाही, इथं डॉक्टर येत नाही, इथं कुठला दवाखाना नाही, कुठलं मेडिसिन मिळत नाही. याच्यासाठी एक जरी एनसी माता असली तरी त्यांच्यासाठी मी इथपर्यंत व्हिजिट करते. आधी जेव्हा मी इथे यायचे ना, तर एवढा रस्ता खराब होता हा की गाडी सुद्धा आम्हाला इथपर्यंत आणता येत नव्हती. खूपदा रस्त्यानं अशा अडचणी येत होत्या. पण मनात एक होतं की जाऊ दे, आपण जर नाही गेलो तर यांना या सगळ्या सुविधा मिळणार नाही. आणि एरवी तसं आपल्याला जर मला कधी कधी उशीर व्हायचा ती त्यांच्या सासऱ्या त्यांना बोलायच्या, उशीर झाला, ते येत नाही, शेतात कामाला जायचंय. मग याच्यासाठी मी म्हटलं जाऊ दे, काही अडचणी आल्या तरी आपण हे करायचं, सोडायचं नाही असं मनात होतच. पण आता कालांतराने त्यांच्यात पण बदल होत गेले की त्यांच्या समोर पण काही लोक असे आले की ज्यांना खरंच प्रॉब्लेम आला, की काही अडचणी आल्यामुळे त्यांचे बाळ दगावले, काही मिसकॅरेज झाले म्हणजे गर्भपात झाले, याच्यामुळे त्यांच्यात पण सुधारणा झाली की त्यांना पण असं वाटायला लागलं की पहिले काळ वेगळा होता, आता काळ बदलला. पहिले जर आपण नाही गेलो तर आपल्या वेळेचं ठीक होतं, पण आता जावंच लागणार आहे, दाखवावंच लागणार आहे, मेडिसिन घ्यावं लागणार आहे. आमच्यासारखे जे आरोग्य मित्र आहे, आशा वर्कर आहे, हे चालते फिरते हॉस्पिटल आहे. ज्यांच्याकडे शेती नाही त्यांना दुसऱ्यांच्या शेतात रोज मजुरीला जावं लागतं. जे नवरे म्हणजे पती असते, कमवते कमी आणि खर्च ते जास्त. आशांच्या घरचं जर तिची हालत जास्त खराब राहते मग, आणि एक तर स्वतःचं शेत नसल्यामुळे तिच्या हातामध्ये काहीच नाही राहत. जे मजुरीचे पैसे येईन तेच, आणि त्यातले त्यात जर नवऱ्यानं ते मागितले, मारून कुटून घेतले, तर ती ते पण नाही राहत तिच्याकडं, मग ती काहीच नाही खाऊ शकत. ती घरच्या 2 टायमाच्या जेवणाला सुद्धा हे राहते. तरी ती सकाळच्या 5 पासून रात्रीचे 10-11 जरी वाजले तरी तिला सारखं काम करत राहावं लागतं. मग तिला त्याच्यात स्वतःचा विचार नाही आहे की आपण गोळ्या घ्यायच्या विसरलो, की आपण जेवायचं विसरलो, की आज आपल्याला जेवायलाच नाहीये. सगळ्यांचं जर करून तिला मागं उरलं तरच खायला मिळतं, नाही तर नाही. याच्यामध्ये बऱ्याच गोष्टी अशा राहून जाते की ती कुपोषित पण होते. बऱ्याचदा असं होतं, आणि ती कुपोषित झाली की तिचं बाळ पण तसंच जन्माला येतं पुढं. हे पण झालेलं आहे. काही लोकांचं असं म्हणणं आहे की ह्या गोळ्या जर घेतल्या की बाळाचं वजन जास्त वाढतं, मग डिलिव्हरी मध्ये त्रास होतो, त्याच्यामुळे पण काही लोक घेत नाही. दुसरी गोष्ट, काहींना उलटी मळमळीचा त्रास होतो, त्याच्यामुळे पण घेत नाही. आणि अजून असे काही लोक की ज्यांना असं वाटतं की ह्या गोळ्या काहीतरी वेगळाच आहे, हे उगाचच आम्हाला देते, त्याच्यामुळे पण त्यांना नाही खावं वाटते. पण त्यांना आमच्या व्यतिरिक्त अजून दुसरं कोणी समजावलं ना, तेव्हा कुठे त्यांची तयारी राहती घ्यायची. अनेमिक आता 10 मध्ये कमीत कमी 3 ते 4 माता तरी अनेमिक आहे. म्हणजे बरंच प्रमाण, अजून 40% तरी अनेमिक आपल्याला सापडतेच. जे शेतकरी लोक पिकवते की हे सगळा देश खातो, पण जे पिकवणार आहे त्याच्या वाट्याला काय येतं, तो काय खातो, याचा विचार खरंच कोणीच नाही करत.